My brother tells me nobody cares about me at home, and my parents agree with him. But the next morning after I left, they call me to say they care about my brother. In prison. I never thought my life would fall apart like this. You know that feeling of just being a shadow, something you don't notice, but it's there, always occupying the same space and making no impact whatsoever? That's how I felt. Like I was there just because someone needed me to keep the house running. And I'm not talking just about doing chores or schoolwork, I could handle that. It was the way they looked at me, or rather, didn't look at me. It was the feeling of being a mistake others hadn't noticed yet, but was there, growing, impossible to ignore. I was 17, and my name was just another echo in the house, the kind of thing nobody even bothers to listen to. It was funny, because in a way I knew my family wasn't perfect. You know that thing you feel, but you don't say out loud? Yeah, that was my home. Of course, my mom and dad always tried to give their best, but something was off. When I saw how things worked around here, it felt like my brother, Gabriel, had this ability to turn everything into a spectacle, and everyone was clapping, even my parents. Gabriel was 14, the youngest, the golden child. Nothing he did was wrong. He could hang out with his friends late, make a mess, even take my stuff, and no one said a word. But me? Well, I was always in this uncomfortable position, trying to be the kid who didn't bother anyone, but in the end, it always felt like my presence was just a burden. It was exhausting trying to get noticed. I worked so hard to be the good student, the good son, the responsible one, the one who helped out around the house, but none of it seemed to matter. My dad, Carlos, spent all day at work, and when he got home, he was so tired that he just flopped on the couch and hoped things would sort themselves out. My mom, Amanda, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of emotions, always trying to please everyone. But with Gabriel, she always seemed softer, more patient. While with me, she was a little cold, almost distant. I was getting used to being the nobody, until one day, a simple situation became the breaking point. I got home after my shift at the cafe. It was a tiring job, but the money gave me a sense of independence I loved. So I did what felt natural, threw my backpack in the living room, and collapsed on the couch, just wanting a little rest before starting to study. But when I walked in, I felt that knot in my stomach. Something was wrong. My notes were scattered all over the floor, torn up. My sheets, which I'd spent the whole week reviewing for the history test, were now unrecognizable, as if someone had come through just to destroy everything. My books, my materials, were tossed in a corner. In that moment, rage shot through me. And on the couch, there he was, Gabriel, holding the game controller, totally immersed in his game like nothing was happening. I stopped at the door trying to process what I was seeing. "Gabriel, did you do this?" I asked, my voice barely hiding the irritation. He looked at me with a couldn't care less smile, waved his hand and said, without even looking up, from the screen, "I don't know, Lucas, you should organize your stuff better." That was it. My brain short-circuited. I tried to hold it in, but the frustration exploded. "You destroyed my stuff. How can you do that?" I knew I was overreacting, but the feeling of powerlessness was so strong that the words just came out without a filter. His answer was a simple, "Don't care," followed by a grunt that sounded more like a sigh of disgust. The worst part? Neither of my parents showed up. Carlos was in the kitchen reading the newspaper, and Amanda was in her room, watching her soap opera. Nobody cared. Nobody even looked up to see what was going on. When I tried to talk to them about it, I got an uncomfortable silence, followed by my dad's comment, "Stop it, Lucas. Gabriel's just a kid. Stop being dramatic. It's not the end of the world." I wanted to scream. I wanted to do something, but I just stood there, frozen, watching how everything felt so out of place, so wrong. "But he destroyed my stuff, Dad. Isn't that a big deal?" "Don't exaggerate, son," he replied, not even looking at me. It was like he had no idea what was going on, and that's when I realized I'd never be heard, no matter how hard I tried. And in that moment, I understood that nothing would change. I didn't matter. Not to them. For me, that was a slap in the face. That night, I made a decision that felt as insane as it was necessary. I couldn't stay there anymore. I didn't want to be part of this dynamic. I didn't want to be invisible anymore. I didn't want to live in a house where my worth was measured by how much I could silence my pain. I took a deep breath, grabbed my stuff, and in the middle of the night, with my backpack on my back and my heart heavy, I left home. I knew that once I took those first steps, there would be no turning back. I was deciding to be something more than what they always told me I was. The shadow. I left. When I left home, I had no plan. I didn't know exactly what I'd do or where I'd go, but I knew that anything would be better than staying in that suffocating environment. The only thing I had with me, besides my backpack, was this weird mix of freedom and fear. When you make such a drastic decision, the first thing you feel is being totally lost, but at the same time, this sense of power starts to creep in, like you've just shrugged off a burden. I went to Pedro's place, my best friend. Pedro was always the guy who seemed to have everything under control. He was the type who wasn't afraid to laugh, even in the most tense situations, and that always made me feel like, no matter how messy life was around me, at least with him, I could breathe for a bit. I showed up at his place in the middle of the night, not really thinking much about it. I rang the doorbell, and to my surprise, he opened the door without hesitating. His smile made me feel a little lighter. "You good, man?" he asked, clearly confused, but without any judgment. "Yeah, I'm better now," I said, more to myself than to him as I walked inside. Pedro didn't bombard me with questions about what happened. He just told me to relax, that I was in good company. He offered me a couch, a blanket, and even a slice of cold pizza he was eating. It was the kind of support I never thought I'd need, but in that moment, it was exactly what I needed. His house was so different from mine. It had this lighter, more open vibe, you know? Like he had a healthier relationship with life. And for that one night, it made me feel like maybe I had made the right choice. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages and missed calls from my parents. At first, I ignored them without thinking. I didn't want to hear what they had to say. But as the hours passed, I started to wonder, do they care? Are they trying to bring me back? Part of me felt this almost urgent need to answer, to hear them out. But the stronger part of me was determined not to give in. That feeling of being invisible, of never being heard, kept banging in my head. I wasn't about to be the good son that no one notices anymore. As I sat there, staring at my phone, something inside me chuckled quietly. They were calling, but it wasn't to check on me or to apologize. No. They were trying to find a way, to fix the mess they themselves had helped create. They'd never cared enough to see how bad I was, but now, with Gabriel messing up big time, everything was different. They needed me. The story came out eventually. Gabriel, the golden child, had been arrested for theft. Yep, you read that right. Gabriel, the angel, the one who never did anything wrong, was now in deep trouble. Apparently, he got involved in a scam with some friends from school, stealing stuff from stores and selling it. None of this made sense to me. I always knew he's had some issues, but I never imagined he'd go this far. The idea that he could be involved in something so serious, something the police had to handle, was a real bombshell. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony of it all. They always treated Gabriel like he was perfect, and now he was a huge problem for them. Like some cosmic justice, my absence finally seemed to be making an impact. My parents were desperate. Their messages started to sound more urgent, more dramatic. "Lucas, please, we need you. Gabriel messed up big time. Can you help fix this?" I knew I was in a position of power, and in a way, it gave me a strange sense of pleasure. It wasn't exactly satisfaction over his misfortune, but more like seeing that finally my absence was being noticed. Before, when I was there, it felt like nobody cared, but now it seemed like I was the only one who could fix things. But I stayed silent. I didn't return any calls. I didn't reply to any messages. And honestly, I felt kind of comfortable with it. I knew this situation was my chance to show them that I wasn't the backup plan. I wouldn't be the shadow anymore. Now it was Gabriel in the back seat, and I was finally in control. As the days went by, the pleas for help got more desperate. The calls became more urgent, and I kind of enjoyed it. I had the power to make my family chase after me, beg me, need me. Even though I knew what was happening to Gabriel was serious, I couldn't help but feel this twisted sense of satisfaction watching them panic. Finally, my absence was making a real difference. Maybe I was wrong to feel this way, but the anger, resentment, and even a little bit of revenge outweighed everything else at that moment. The situation dragged on, and deep down, I knew this conflict wouldn't have a simple resolution. That moment, my escape, and my parents' need for help, all of it was forcing me to question what I really wanted from my family. I didn't want to be just a plan B. I didn't want to be ignored anymore. And now, with Gabriel in jail and them facing a crisis, I finally had the chance to be heard. And I wasn't about to waste it. I don't know what they expected from me, but I knew what I wanted. to show them that my existence wasn't something they could ignore anymore, that my absence, one way or another, made a difference. When I finally decided to go back home, the plan was simple. I was going to confront them. I knew things with Gabriel were complicated, but I couldn't shake this quiet sense of revenge for everything that had happened up until that point. The fact that they actually needed me now made the scales tip in my favor, and I wasn't about to let that chance slip away. I got there earlier than I expected, because the tension in the air had me walking faster. The house, usually filled with a calmness that used to drive me nuts, now felt thick with desperation. My dad, always the pillar of authority and rigidity, was sitting on the couch with his head in his hands, like the weight of the world was on him. He, who'd never shown a hint of weakness, was now completely out of control. His eyes were swollen from worrying, and for a second, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction seeing him so vulnerable, finally realizing the pain I'd been carrying for years. My mom was even worse. She paced the house like a tiger in a cage, not knowing what to do. Eyes glued to her phone like checking a message would somehow change everything. She'd always been the emotional one, but now she was clearly on the verge of breaking down. I, who had always been the invisible son, watched them both, so sure of themselves when things were good, now completely unraveling in front of a situation they couldn't control. And then there was Gabriel, the golden boy. He wasn't physically there, of course, but the weight of his absence was the most oppressive thing in the room. They didn't know how to deal with it. I could feel their frustration at not knowing how to fix the mess Gabriel had made. The perfect kid was now stuck in a jail cell, and his parents, who had always prided themselves on their image of a happy, flawless family, were desperate and in need of help. I walked into the room without saying a word, and for a moment, the silence was so deafening it felt like everything I was feeling, the anger, the contempt, the feeling of finally being in control, was hanging in the air. My dad looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, but didn't say anything. My mom, on the other hand, started crying as soon as she saw me. It was a mix of regret, panic, and desperation. But before she could pull me into a hug, I interrupted her. "You're crying, Mom, but it's not worth it," I said, and the coldness in my voice seemed to freeze the air around us. "You and Dad always ignored me, and now you think you're just gonna fix everything like this? Like I'm the last resort, the last card you have to save Gabriel?" My dad, usually so firm, now seemed small in front of me. He got up from the couch and tried to speak, but the tension was so thick that his words came out in fragments. "Lucas, please, you need to understand. We don't know what to do. We need you." "You need me?" I cut him off again, feeling the anger boil inside me. "Where were you when I needed you? Where were you when I was pushed aside? Always trying to make me the problem, while Gabriel..." Oh, Gabriel. He did whatever he wanted, and now look at him. My dad, with the most closed-off expression I could remember, said, "We failed you, Lucas. We failed to see that you were, well, suffering. But now's not the time to argue. It's time to help. Gabriel needs you. We don't know what to do." I looked at him with a mix of disdain and frustration. "And I don't know what to do with this. I'm done being the good son, the perfect son, the one who never does anything wrong, the one who always obeys. Enough. I'm not your plan B anymore. I'm not the one waiting around for scraps of attention. So here's the deal." They exchanged a nervous look. The tension was so high I could practically feel static in the air. "I'll help, but there's a price," I went on. "And that price isn't money, though I know you guys don't have much of that left after selling the 50-inch TV. What I want is an apology. I want a public apology. Don't just say sorry, Lucas. No. I want you to admit to everyone, to the whole family, that you always left me out, that you treated me like I was less important than Gabriel. I want the truth. I want your humility. Because before anything else, I'm a person, and I'm tired of being invisible." The room fell into complete silence. Neither my mom nor my dad could process what I was asking, but they knew they had no other choice. They knew I wasn't playing around. This wasn't about Gabriel or the bail anymore. It was about me, and for the first time, it was starting to sink in. They were broken, and I was the only key to fix what they'd messed up. Finally, my mom, with tears in her eyes, muttered, We failed, Lucas. We have to admit it. We want you to help us, but... Of course, you're right. We didn't do enough. We never did." My dad, his voice choked, added, "We always wanted the best for Gabriel, but that doesn't excuse what we did to you. I'm sorry, son. I didn't expect it to be so easy, but at the same time, I couldn't help the bitter smile that formed on my face. As humiliating as it was for them, I finally felt heard. That thing I'd always wanted, a validation of my existence, of how much I really mattered, was right there in those forced apologies, and the irony didn't escape me. I had gotten what I wanted, but I couldn't help but feel a bit of satisfaction from the whole thing. They were finally recognizing my pain, and in some way, that gave me a pleasure I couldn't explain. The victory wasn't in fixing Gabriel's problem. The victory was in finally being seen. The decision not to help Gabriel was a weight I carried for a while, but deep down, I knew it was the right choice. I had already been too good to this family, had sacrificed so much for them, and the truth was, I didn't have anything left in me to care about Gabriel's mess. He never cared about me or anyone other than himself. And if my parents still wanted to play heroes and try to save him, that was their problem, not mine. But Gabriel, of course, wasn't giving up that easily. I knew he'd try something. Soon, the messages started coming in, one after the other. He didn't just want to get back at me for not helping him. He wanted to manipulate me, make me feel guilty. The messages were full of accusations like, "You abandoned me, you left me hanging," as if it was my responsibility to fix his mistakes. He tried to make me feel like the villain of the story, like the family traitor. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't the old Lucas, the invisible son, the son who cared about nothing but pleasing everyone else. I was exhausted from being that guy. I'd given my all, tried to be the good son, the perfect brother. And look where that got me. Gabriel. Locked up for theft with parents desperate for a solution, and me, shoved to the side, just like I always had been. So, instead of giving in and falling into his trap, I decided to play the game a different way. I saved all Gabriel's messages, all those threats and manipulations he thought would make me crack. Deep down, I knew he was just digging his own grave. I decided to hand them over to the police. I was done being the family's doormat. If he wanted to play dirty, I'd play dirtier. It was a cold move, but at the same time, a kind of silent revenge. The consequences were immediate. Gabriel violated the conditions of his bail, and within days, he was back in jail. My parents, who had risked so much to try to fix things for him, were now facing yet another public humiliation. They'd tried to protect the golden boy, but all they got was more lost money, more lost prestige, and the certainty that Gabriel was beyond. Saving the situation was almost ironic. I, the problematic son, the one they'd neglected, was now in a position none of us could have imagined. I was the only one who seemed to be in control. And I liked it. It wasn't pure revenge, it was more about liberation, finally doing something for myself after so long being ignored and underestimated. As for me, life went on. I kept living with Pedro until I turned 18. I didn't have a concrete plan, but I knew I was in a better place than I'd ever been. I was free from my family, from the constant weight of their disregard, from being compared to Gabriel. I was in control of my destiny for the first time in ages. No more expectations, no more pressure to be something I wasn't. It was just me, living my life, making mistakes, and learning at my own pace. I was tired of the idea of having to go back home, of having to make peace. That was never what I wanted. I just wanted to be seen, to be respected. And in the end, I got that. Not from them, not for their approval, but for myself. Sure, the road to independence wasn't easy. At first, there were the typical challenges of a young person trying to balance adulthood. I still didn't know how to handle the loneliness that, as much as I tried to deny it, hit me hard from time to time. Sometimes I'd think about the moments I had with my family, what it was like looking at Gabriel and seeing that brother who, deep down, always knew he'd get away with anything, always had an excuse for everything. But over time, I learned to value myself. I started doing things my way, without waiting for validation from anyone, and that gave me a quiet satisfaction I never thought I'd have. Meanwhile, Gabriel continued his downward spiral. His prison time wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of a series of mistakes. But the most curious thing was seeing how my parents, who had always treated him like a prince, now found themselves powerless in the face of everything he'd done. They were paying the price for their choices. The things they'd never said to me, the things I'd always wanted to hear, were now being said with the weight of knowing it was too late. And me? I moved on. I graduated, started looking for a steady job, and even made some friendships that became important to me. It wasn't a perfect path, of course, but it was my path. I was finally breathing freely. I didn't need the scraps of attention my family had always given me. I knew my life now depended on me. Every now and then, I wondered what would have happened if I had decided to go back home and try to fix things differently. But in the end, I knew there was no turning back. I had chosen to be my own hero. And, in the end, that was the only thing that really made sense to me. Little by little, I started distancing myself from everything that was old, everything that tied me to the past. Gabriel, my parents, the house. It all became a distant echo. What I had now was my own life, built with my mistakes, my choices, and my freedom. And as much as my family's story was marked by frustration and hurt, I knew I had finally found my own way.